Okay, hello everybody. Welcome to episode 2 of the Exponential-e podcasts. So this podcast is Accelerating Outcomes in Modern Warfare. I'm Nick Wood. I'm the Defence Client Director here at Exponential-e. I have Faz here with me, who's the AI consultant. And our guest today at this podcast is retired Air Marshal Ed Stringer.
Good morning.
Ed, thank you for your time.
Nice pleasure.
Okay, so some could say, Ed, we're in a very difficult period at the moment. The world's in some instability. People are talking about funding being restricted domestically. I'm not sure elsewhere whether it is as restricted. So some questions we have here, which I'll be sharing with my colleague Faz, perhaps might tease out some of those issues in that context that we're seeing at the moment. So looking at the big picture side of things, has the definition of mission success changed in modern warfare, do you think? And is speed now as important as firepower?
Well, I don't think the whatever the definition of mission success ever was has changed. Whether you're right, either you're mission successful or it isn't. I think what the question's getting at is, are you executing missions in a different way?
Yep.
So you don't want me to take the next 30 minutes off into some great semantic argument about the definition of mission, or what is sometimes quite interesting is confusing inputs with outputs, i.e. the mission is a success because I've executed all the things I was asked to do. Yeah. That's never been a definition of mission success.
No, it hasn't. Yep.
And that's quite important when you look through the warfare of the second industrial offset, because this is going to lead to where you want to go, which was bringing precision in my own background, as you know, being Air Force, is aerospace. And my first war was the first Gulf War, and everybody marveled, didn't they, at bombs down ventilation hatches and stealth fighters and this precision and one bomb, one target every time. The truth is, you can very accurately hit the wrong thing. And as Mattis has said quite recently, probably obliquely, about what's going on in Iran, there's more to war than targeting. So if your definition of mission success is I hit all 1,200 targets on my high-tech system and I've done it inside 5 minutes, well, that's fine. But if the opposition goes, yeah, and so what? So how do you define the mission? Is the mission hitting the target? Is the mission achieving an outcome? And you should always set your mission success as in achieving an outcome. So in that case, no. But has the way of achieving it changed, and has the partnership between military and industry changed? And I'd say yes, fundamentally. And probably, the next remaining 25 minutes, we could usefully look at what that means.
I think the term mission criticality, mission success within industry, I'd be really interested to understand how that message is conveyed, because as you've just said, there's perhaps a difference between inputs and outputs. And how do we convey a message of mission across over to industry in a way that's meaningful, so that encapsulates industry to make them feel as one with defence, and therefore leading in the same trajectory, being on the same path, and not simply supplier defence, so outsourcing in the traditional sense.
Yeah, so this is it's a good way of framing it, because it allows us to talk about opportunity versus just risk.
Yeah.
And if you wanted to do a caricature old school CAD mid buying big military plant, you could say you spend X years, if not decades, hammering out a contract, which then the supplier, normally a big prime, and the customer approach slightly differently. The customer thinks he's got a deal and we're going to get, let's say, an aircraft carrier. And the supplier thinks, right, we've now got another 20 years of our lawyers arguing about exactly what the contract means. And I know full well that, and this is, if you like, the learnt behaviour, I know full well that they're going to change the spec, because it's taking us 20 years to build. Yep. So it's always going to change. And also there's going to be a throughput of people on the other side, and they'll all have slightly different views. I don't think I'm being too cynical in saying I think it was well known some contracts were underbid beforehand, knowing full well that over that time
recover the money.
You'd recover the money. You'd recover the money in different ways.
Yeah.
So what you've got there is a semi-adversarial system, and we can all work out the psychology of contracting around that, and that's how commercial lawyers make their money, and who can afford the best private commercial lawyers. Let's not go any further on that one. But do I have that same contract if I buy an Apple laptop? Well, I have a certain element of it in that the hardware, if it fails, there'll be. But what I'm really buying is the software, isn't it? That's what I'm really buying. I'm actually buying a vehicle for iOS in Apple's case. I appreciate other computers are available. And there, the psychological contract is quite aligned because I just want it to work and I want it to be secure. And the producer here knows that if that software doesn't work or falls behind its competitors, and there are huge holes in it and it's not secure and blah, 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 then it too is going to fail and people will jump ship and go to one of the other. Yeah. Now, when I buy that, and I find this psychology that's quite interesting for all of us. When I buy hardware, even I'm thinking, is it an 18-month warranty? Is it a 2-year warranty? I'm thinking, but I never ask, when's the first big patch going to drop? Yeah. I don't write. I just accept that that's going to happen. And someone in Apple has worked out pricing all this, how much it costs to run the software and what the evolution costs. And I don't care if I get 2 updates in a month and then nothing for 6 months, as long as I get the regular patches and I can keep on top of it. And my sense, keep an eye on the market, is that it works, and I wouldn't be better off leaping to Microsoft or Linux or some other system that I could go for. So our psychological contract's the same. So in this sense, back to your question, there was a mission there. The mission was useful home computing on a device that has a range of apps that might not be anything to do with Apple's operating system, but an operating system and some of the other bits and pieces that allows me to do all the things I want to do and allows me to be quite creative with it and maybe find some other ways of using it. So if you wrote the mission as, have you sold a bit of hardware? Have you done an update? Have you done this? Well, you might tick all those boxes and still fail. If the mission's happy customer, then we can start to write some sensible specs. Now, translate that into a situational awareness system for the military based on some sort of cloud-derived information management system that filters, sorts. Now, there's a psychological contract there, isn't there? Because your manufacturer wants you to be at the cutting edge, because if you're not, you might ditch it. You want to be at the cutting edge, because if you're not, you might lose the next war. So I think we have to definitely think about 2 things. The first is understanding, back to your very first question, how do you define a sense of mission that everybody can buy into and becomes the basis of the negotiation, not the artifacts you're going to sell. And then the second is extrapolating from that one, it's so how now do we rethink our procurement practices to allow us to contract for mission rather than contract for maybe more tangible sub-elements of it.
I think that's really interesting, because when you look at how the market procures currently, you do see a want or a desire to operate in the way that you've just described, the kind of psychological contract. But you also see a defensive stance, and excuse the pun, from both sides, where perhaps they feel that if I work in that way, I will get taken advantage of, because the ask or the mission may change to such an extent where I end up losing money or spending excessive time or being asked to do things that perhaps you couldn't have written down in the first place. And I think it's just trying to understand that balance. It's perhaps not something that can be answered here, but that is certainly what I see, and in terms of behavior out there. And I don't know if there is an answer, and I don't know if the responsibility solely sits within defence and for them to change their model and the way they go out to market, or if suppliers need to place more trust in what they're doing with their partners in terms of the customers buying into them, and be a little bit more flexible. And especially when I look at contracts in defence, they're a lot more stringent. They're almost there waiting. They're so guarded in their approach. It's as if they're expecting things to go wrong. So therefore, every little thing has this is going to cost you more, and therefore by inherently it's already inflexible from day one. So, yeah.
Well, let me give you 3 very quick examples. Yeah. And as soon as I say 3 quick examples, 61-year-old brain will only remember two of them, and I'll be scrabbling for the third. More than a decade ago now, I worked with the then quite nascent Improbable, which Herman the Ruler set up, and really interesting company. And shortly into our relationship, as he's what became Digital Twins, he said all his friends in the tech world, and he graduated from Cambridge with an excellent computer science degree, and all his friends would have gone, they all said, don't get anywhere near the MOD. They'll demand yesterday's technology tomorrow, and then they won't pay for it. And in that simple phrase, what they're actually saying is they don't understand their part, the customer, in the mission that you need to be a cutting edge. You can't ossify your tech because they're only going to pay for it next year, and they want to have frozen the standard at a year before that because you know what you're paying for. So that is an interesting one to employ. Then you go to Anduril, who wanted to be a AI-based, software-driven company. So there's a sort of purity of approach. And then they realised that no one was going to pay 2 million nominal sums. No one was going to pay $2 million for a bunch of code. But if you spent $50 for a tin box and then put $2 million worth of code in it, people were happy to pay for it because you've actually had a thing. You had a tangible thing. So they ended up making stuff because they realised that departments of defence, ministries of defence, are much better at buying stuff. And the final thought, if we're thinking about software in a very, very small s way, but software is a manifestation. It's the most sort of amorphous manifestation of intellectual property, isn't it? It's code. I was working with IT-related business in Defence Academy. The people have started hacking for defence, and some of their software is the idea of events that you can run, and they'd thought them through and they got them up and running, and it does actually lead into the software world. And having worked with us to do it, the commercial arm of the Ministry of Defence, we've got to compete that. And hold on, how are you going to compete it? If you put that code, which is what it is, it's lines of IP, you put that out there and said, who else can do this? Well, obviously, probably a lot of people can do that. And they can do it really cheaply if they just haven't spent 3 months or 3 weeks, whatever it is, working with us on it. So that sort of competition doesn't work either. But then we're back to what we spoke about before with if I buy an Apple computer or a Microsoft. I am trusting that you need to be at the cutting edge, and you will let me know, and I'm not going to have to nail it down, ask you to give me all your IP, and then I'm going to ask someone else whether they can do it 5 pence cheaper.
But what you're talking about there is a little contentious, because you're talking about what people's
I was hoping to be very contentious, otherwise no one's going to tune in, are they?
You're talking about people's key performance indicators in a way. My measure of success as the customer may be different to the measure of success to my own procurement body. And therefore we are not aligned already, because like you're saying, I'm not looking at all of the work that preceded it. I'm procurement, I come in at a certain phase, I've been asked to do a certain thing, and best value is my outcome. And best value may mean something different to that body, whereas it might mean something very different to the customer entity at the same time. Yeah,
so we did do some work on this, and I see we, MOD Structure Joint Force Development, when we wrote a blueprint back in 2020, and one of the little essays I wrote at the start of it was when we think about evolving the force over the next, we picked 4 years. It was quite arbitrary at the time in some ways. Well, it wasn't. It was built around an exercise plot, and that we were looking 4 years hence, a major NATO exercise. So we thought we've got 4 years to develop everything we're going to write about. Shortly after, Rishi Sunak gave the Ministry of Defence 16.5 billion for transformation over 4 years. So this seemed a marvellous gift. And the conceit was, well, the hardware ain't going to change in 4 years. There'll still be QEC carriers. There'll still be F-35s type. Right? Yeah. What changes? It's the linking. It's the linking glue. And we said, but to develop that, for the reasons we've outlined, you've got to adopt the min viable product methodology. But that means everybody's got to adopt it. So industry will want to do it. And we went out to industry and they said, this is great. Literally, they all came back from prime to the sort of SMEs I've already, I've already spoken about. But you, the end user, also have to buy into the MVP. And that actually sits pretty easily on quite a few military people. You've just been out at Soft Week, and I can give you some examples of where it's worked, over here. That sort of mission focused, entrepreneurial, try it, it fails quickly, move on to something else, is how all those organisations have always thought. So you've got an alignment there. The thing is, on the third part of that triangle, can the commercial sector work that way? And that's where it's really difficult.
Do you not think it's changed recently with Commercial-X and everything behind that?
I hear good things about Commercial-X. I've not been involved directly, so to give fair play.
Yeah.
My question to them, and you might get them in a subsequent podcast, so I'm really not going to.
Yep.
But I can pick other organisations that I see the services creating, and I hesitate to mention them because I don't want this to be seen as... but one of them that I was closely associated with was doing some of this rapid capability stuff. The trouble is, if you don't alter the whole backbone, and my criticism I boil down to, it's like building digital baubles to hang on an analog Christmas tree. You get little pockets of excellence, but unless you get that back to iOS, unless you've got the core digital backbone, you won't get the real you won't get the real scaling. So if Commercial-X becomes, it shouldn't be an odd thing, it should just be commercial. And when that happens, then I think we know we've got it right. And we've already mentioned Anduril, but there are others who set themselves up to try and create software as the mission, and then you add the hardware in as required. And when we see that becoming the norm, and commercial is built around it, and I say we were plugged into government at the time. I think I'm right in saying it was when he was still in there, Dominic Cummings, who had seen this problem, and it probably is because he writes a lot about that side of the house. And I certainly worked with two guys who had been put into from the Cabinet Office into the Treasury to think this through, because we're talking about defence here, but it's true for the health service. It's true across HMR. So there's all sorts of areas in government that would benefit, as happened in Ukraine in 2019 with Mikhailo Fedorov. In being able to build that infrastructure across government, so you've got a digitised government, in which case it's not just small areas of the MOD where you can afford to take risk and write stuff off because people are only interested in missions and outcomes, like UK Special Forces Group, that I would say has been ahead of the pack here. That needs to go mainstream. And I think the work that, if anybody's out there, PhD students looking for a research subject, go and work out what the cost of compliance has been over the last decades, vice the possible losses if you've taken a risk-based approach. And I know in one area that I was involved in, my spend every year was £250,000, and I got my in-house team to do the cost of compliance. Want to guess what that was?
Millions.
This is now an audience participation podcast. You see,
I didn't
throwing
want to
it
guess.
back at you. It's 750,000. It's ludicrous. It's absolutely ludicrous. And when I push back on that, to be fair, the financial side of the civil service saw it as ludicrous, but then took many, many months. I'm going to say 6. It might have been a year to come back and go, we've got that reduced by 30%. You're going, but you're still spending. You're still spending $500,000 to make sure that $250,000 wasn't misspent. That cannot, that can't be right. Now, of course, I've picked a shock horror story. But I think my point, is valid. I don't see that. I'll give you another one, and this is getting sort of close to home with members of our shadow board here. But GCHQ moved really quickly a few years back now, when realised that the information environment was cyber, not analog, and they moved from radio waves and bleeps and squeaks to. Now, there must have been a heck of a lot of risk involved in moving that quickly, but I've never heard even a whiff of, we've got to dive in, there was so much money wasted, and look how they've moved, and look how they keep on top. So if you were to see the military as something much more like GCHQ with some hardware attached, and then try and remodel around that, and then stress test that for what's the worst that can happen. I will put I'd stake a heck of a lot of the family farm on the money you might lose on a risk-based approach. It's still going to be less than the money that we we all know the scandals that's been wasted on some of the more traditional procurement projects. But it requires a great leap of faith. It requires two things. The structure of procurement is going to have to change. That's hard enough.
Yeah.
But the psychology behind it, the philosophy of procurement is going to have to change. And you've got tens of thousands of people who've been steeped in the old ways for a very long time.
Indeed.
And I guess that, interestingly enough, I think even when you talked about changing the backbone, within the backbone, you still have individuals making decisions. And unfortunately, if an individual across that backbone takes that leap of faith and things don't pan out in the way that they expected, so they take more of the compliance route where, this is exactly what we asked for, this is what you're going to end up with, whilst we understand things are going to evolve, we don't really understand enough about how this is going to pan out. I don't think people are ready to, it doesn't feel like they're ready to take that leap of faith as you've just described it.
No, I agree. And I can extend one of my previous little dits, actually, that Improbable one, because when the pandemic hit, two things happened. One, we could accelerate something I'd already done, which is go to the National Security Advisor and say, look, we're building a digital twin at a national level as a test case, a technology demonstrator program. Why don't we do one for elements of the UK grid to help you with stuff to do with pandemic or recovery pandemic? Well, that's a great idea. So one element of 70 Whitehall, the Cabinet Office, is now working with us to achieve that. Meanwhile, just down the corridor in the commercial department, new personnel turnover that year looked at the contract that we had signed with them for the technology demonstrator program and said, well, that's not allowed. Now we thought this was a no-brainer, so we went back with all the emails from a year ago from that department clearing it. I'm trying to steer clear of naming any, because it really isn't pejorative. This is just structural.
Yeah.
And they said, well, we don't think that those people should have given the waiver. And to be fair to them, to write the technology demonstrator program contract, because we couldn't specify an outcome. That was the point. It's a demonstrator program. We had to write failure as an acceptable outcome. We had to write the contract to spend, and it was match funded by the company. That's another good thing. So whatever we put in, won't say what it was. It's not a fantastic amount of money, but the company put at least that in themselves. And we said, we're doing this because this would be such a significant advantage. If our foes can do it and we can't, we will be at a real disadvantage. And by that stage, there was enough literature out there, technical literature about the possibilities of building such things, that I think we'd have been derelict in our duty not to test them.
Yeah.
But that's weird, isn't it? It shows how the previous construct was slightly mad in that you had to write failure as an acceptable outcome. And if not, if there are benefits, then those are an additional bonus. Yeah. But we can't hold anybody to account for them. So it's an inversion of the previous thing that didn't work, rather than create the new, which probably would have had gain share elements in it. We'll work on it. We'll accept if we don't. These are acceptable outcomes. These are better outcomes. And if it really takes off, and I will say that when we first went to that company a while back, they offered a gain share. And given how they sold it in other places, the MOD could have made money out of it by sharing IP in the earliest stages.
Again, not a tangible risk from the outset, not a tangible benefit from the outset.
No, but here's the point about mission. So that Cabinet Office ruling that you shouldn't have done it and we can't go into the second year, the next thing that kicks in with old school thinking, and I would say public v private sector, and where the element of mission can help, and where, let's just stick with, we've used them already, UK Special Forces Group. Those are one of the elements of the British military that really have a sense of time.
Yeah.
So the Cabinet said, well, we're going to make a decision next month. Well, we're going to make a decision next month. Well, of course, the company come back and say, I can't keep a design team of software engineers hanging around month after month. If you don't make a decision, we're killing it, because I've got to move them on to the next product. Otherwise, we're going to fall behind. We're going to fall behind our competitors. That sort of thing was never really as understood, I don't think, on the public sector side, the commercial side, where it is quite easy, if it's all a bit difficult, to ask for another review, kick it into the long grass for a bit, hope something comes along in the meantime that makes the decision for you, and all those sort of things. So
if I was to try and summarise all that previous discussion for correction by you, Ed, please. So we touched on some examples there. For example, Ukraine showing how they can innovate quickly, all force approach, cross-government. They're in a war situation, so you could say their survival. The next example was COVID, slightly different example, still bumps in the road with procurement rules and that sort of thing. We know probably each frontline command, if not 2 or 3 times over, has their own innovation hubs as well, where they're trying to do that fail fast, develop something, etc., which tends to be a little bit more out of the normal standard procurement chain. What we saying or concluding is the best way to accelerate outcomes for people on the ground. Wait for the war or a crisis, or how else can we?
Well, you can learn from other people's wars and other people's crises. That's a lot cheaper.
Yep.
It's interesting the way you framed it, your first example, because it links back to what we talked about at the start when I said, from 2019, Ukraine tried to go for a digitized national structure. This is 3 years before their war.
Yeah.
This is then probably looking at Estonia and other places, who've done that.
Yeah, Estonia's very, yeah.
And who do they get in to do it? Fedorov, we mentioned him, Mikhailo Fedorov. Where's he now? For the last, somewhere in 6 months and a year. He's the Secretary of State for Defence in Ukraine. Look at how things have. I think 2 people there have really, on that side, Fedorov, who's now coming, still a young guy, not with a hard background in old school defence, but alongside the work that the previous Minister for Strategic Industries, Commission, did. And now look at they're on track for, 10 million drones this year? Well, I remember a very, very senior, a very American general that I did a thing with in London maybe a year ago. And I just happened to mention 4 million drones, and I got they're their dear boy, don't believe everything they tell you. Well, he's on the telly the other day going, they're going to build 10 million drones this year. Look how they've scaled.
Yeah.
But look who's actually in charge now of really thinking through the mission against a strategic development, which I can sketch won't do now, but could sketch the background to. And Fedorov has brought that knowledge from thinking at scale across government. He's got the industrial base, and now they're thinking through the economics of lethality. And as the Institute for War, US-based think tank that you might know publishes daily and has all the way through the Ukraine war, its assessment has just come out this morning and said, well, we're calling it. We think the boot is now on the other foot. We think, the losses the Russians are now suffering are significant. The spring-summer offensive hasn't achieved anything. In fact, they've lost ground. The casualty rate is getting through the roof, more than they can recruit. The Ukrainians, on the other hand, are this, that, and the other. Now, things can turn, of course they can. Measures and countermeasures. But it's interesting to me that if you wanted to point to the architects of success at a strategic level, I put Budanov in there as well, who of course now is taking over from Yermak, as sort of really the chief of staff for Zelensky. Those 3 individuals, none of them has a pure defence background. All of them have thought, what does modern warfare require? How do we take the lessons from the front line? Which mission profiles are working? Achieving the missions I've outlined, which you could sketch now in operational level terms. And they found ways of measuring, people talk about the gamification, which I don't really like, because I don't like war is still a very nasty business, and as soon as I hear gamification and war, but they've taken the thinking of gamification, which is how you reward success, as long as you reward what's mission success, not input success. And that is what now gets what gets reinforced. That is all automated. That's all happening through an automated feedback loop that's correlating success. Where does success come from? Let's reinforce that straight away. So that is foxhole success to factory orders. So we, and the point to answer your question, sorry. We can learn from that. Are we learning from it?
Well,
let's try and find the positives. I think I would argue that because it's had some hard missions to do, and its general entrepreneurial culture, the relatively small budget, and the fact that that budget never gets overly publicly scrutinised, The UK Special Forces Group has been an exemplar in modernising. And, I look at what necessitas mater inventum. I know it's not wartime, but looking at the state of the conventional fleet and the requirements he has, the First Sea Lord, who has come, actually, as we know, from the UK Special Forces Group background, has said, I now need to do that in the maritime environment. And so you've got two experiments, I think, that you can look at now across internal to the British military, and you could get behind both of those. The maritime one is fascinating because it's going to call into question, the whole business of trying to define domains and environments. Because you can say it's the maritime domain, but even in the deep blue maritime domain, depending on how deep the ocean is, and the maximum in Marianas Trench, you might get 30,000 feet, whatever it is, but mostly it's a couple of hundred, maybe 1,000 feet of water space.
Yeah.
You've then got 100,000 feet of airspace, depending on how thin you can go at the top.
Yeah.
And then you've got space. And the whole thing is the cyber environment.
Yep.
So maritime was never only maritime, and since Midway it's been maritime and air, and now it's maritime and air and everything else. As soon as you get to the littoral, you can put land in as well.
Yeah.
So I almost, I wish Gwyn well in this, and you could almost think back to some of the naval reforms at the turn of the previous century. And I know when we were in a totally different part of the ship, but trying to advise the current Secretary of State on what his defence policies might be while he was in opposition. And one of the things we went to look at alternative models for governance. You could look at the Admiralty in the early 1900s, because that was one of the biggest shifts, technological shifts then, from sail, which the Royal Navy was the best in the world at, in so many ways. Not just size and mass, Keeper on Bay, 1759, the technical mastery of the sail environment, and to throw all that away and take a punt on something now that any other industrial nation could now build dreadnoughts and accelerate into that as well. I think what we should be learning from that is the ability to really think through and keep your edge by getting a grip on the new technologies. And the way the Admiralty was organised then actually allowed them to do that. So you've got, as I say, I think two big experiments going on here, and we should be getting behind those and maybe approaching them where you were at the start and say, as we look at these environments, can we start with what's the sense of mission? How would one fold in the industrial base? How would one fold in the IP base? How would one fold in university research? Yeah. How would one look at making this a national effort in the way that the Ukrainians have?
Estonia do as well.
And let's learn the lessons that they're learning the hard way in blood and treasure, and we just have to have a little bit less treasure and hopefully no blood at this stage. And I think there's to do that from the new military strategic headquarters to actually start driving these as experiments that you could then push into the land and air environments, which are evolving too. It's not just the Navy that's doing this, but they're taking things in different directions. But those two I'd pick out as areas that may be exemplars for us all.
Really interesting, thank you.
How we touched on it slightly with some of your examples. How do you think AI is going to help revolutionise this for us then?
Well, I think it is one of the big disruptors. I just only the other day thinking it's strange. I spend more time with Claude than anyone else I know, and I won't go into any other things that do with that. It poses a whole load of questions for all militaries, and saddens me a bit that we've been a little bit slow to this. And I do remember discussions in an organisation I was in 2003-04, which did audits around the military, and for some reason loitering munitions had cropped up. And I thought, those are going to be if those are the future, what are the ethics about launching a loitering munition to start?
Yeah.
And we sort of ducked it because the old school constructs, and I can prove we ducked it because I remember a related question coming up and there was a don't go there, because rather than go there and work it out, it was don't go there and pretend it isn't happening and hope it goes away, and problems never go away, they only fester and come back worse. So now I think we're scrabbling a bit to catch up. I suspect, though, that with so many more people now involved just daily in our daily lives, there's a greater understanding of what machine learning can do as the background to artificial intelligence. And I was encouraged the other day when I heard someone moving the debate on, just in general chat, about man in the loop.
Okay.
Well, I remember 2019 being at a NATO gathering where of futurist technologists, I was Joint Force Development, my opposite number, DJ7 in the Pentagon was there. We were the only two, and we were working on these sort of questions at the time, who did the whoa, 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 when the NATO spokesman said, there will always be a man in the loop. And we said, huh? Yeah. What if it's your anti-ballistic missile defence and the incoming could be a nuclear warhead?
Yeah.
Are you going to say, I'm sorry you all fried, but we were absolutely legally squeaky, or are you going to take a punt, in fact?
Yeah.
And there was a good debate. Well, now I'm hearing people talking about, forget the gender, man on the loop, not in the loop, which implies someone who's got enough knowledge of how the system works to be able to dive in as and when.
Yeah.
Or, back to mission, continually updating as we find out more, so that, and this is back to the sort of ideas of algorithmic warfare, at which point here must you or can you or should you or can't you allow the system to be making some of the decisions, and at which point would you have to have in there some safety breaks? I mean, nuclear firing chains, for example, are obvious ones, aren't they?
Yeah.
But, I mean, when it comes to things like future of anti-submarine warfare, I just picked that, I think, as an example for what's going to happen in all environments. Hence my picking the maritime one before.
Yeah.
It's not a pop at submariners. But I can see that becomes, a game of working out quite easily to work out where 98% of the ocean couldn't have a submarine. And then you're only looking at the 2%, that's left. So when First Sea Lord, we mentioned him already, talks about wave gliders. Well, I remember that as a concept that we were playing with, or trying to look at a few case studies back in 2018. That's 8 years ago now.
Yeah.
And, with some inside knowledge I had, which I won't go into now, but that's behind thinking through predictability and probabilities of where things can be. In the air environment, it's just the same, actually. And previously, it wouldn't have mattered, all that data, because you couldn't crunch it.
Yeah.
So there's another way of answering your AI question.
Yep.
Unless I could have recruited a gazillion analysts to chew through everything and organise a gazillion squared water cooler meetings to go, oh, you found that? Hey, I found that this morning. But when AI can start crunching, in fact, needs to crunch it to train itself, you could probably very quickly, and I think there are companies I could name who are working on this at the moment under Atlantic Bastion.
Yeah.
You can go, well, no submarine driver is going to be there or there, and the salinity and the this and the that and the shit and. Now, of course, submarine drivers will then work out how, and it will be measure and countermeasure again.
Yeah.
But you can see how that would work. And I would say to move environments, one of the things I remember discussing with Ukrainian friends at the start of the war was, based on that thinking for the maritime environment, how do you do it in the air environment? I said, well, imagine a digitised Royal Observer Corps. Remember the Royal Observer Corps? 1939-40?
Yeah.
Reservists standing there saying, I think I can see bombers over Hornchurch, or this bearing from here, or I can hear it sounds like. By the time people create that with a little bit of intuition, oh, well, there's a stream here and there's a stream there, and add the radar in. We said, well, what would that look like if you automated it? Because the machine learning would start to take out some of the biases. We've seen this pattern before and it turned out to be this. I'm sure there's enough knowledge now to work that out. And that's what Ukraine is now doing.
Yeah.
Once again, a guy, who's, I think it was Lviv University, retired physics, or then not retired, physics professor, thinking through what is now sometimes dismissed as mobile phones on a stick.
Yeah.
But you have enough mobile phones on a stick covering the country, and they're just taking in, let's just say, the acoustic element. Shaheeds, flight low level, they make a noise. and the noise, and you see the pulse going around a series, you can very quickly, if that's automated.
Yeah.
So I think the point now to bring this to something is that person man on the loop question means people are going to have to be very familiar with how AI makes decisions to be able to work with it. So I think to go back and revisit work that was started well before my time in that last job. I think a couple of years before, what was then known as DCDC, now Defence Futures, a concepts and doctrine team, had done some very good research from people who are now very much respected in that business. Sadly, some of them are left, but are now in core commercial, really thrusting businesses, writing papers on man-machine teaming, because everybody throughout, in the human-centric parts of the kill web is going to have to understand their role in human-machine teaming and decision-making.
It's interesting. I see it from the consumer world. It's very prevalent. You talked about Claude, people use ChatGPT, Copilot, etc. But when we talk about defense, I'll often hear people talk very much about stovepipe, siloed data banks, as it were. Even within the military as a whole, you've got, you talked about land, sea, air, etc. In order for that to work, it would be quite the step change, because you would have to aggregate that pool of data that you talked about crunching would have to come from multiple different sources in order for it to be valuable as an output. And it's in itself organizing that data in the first place across organizations that have inherently siloed these things off makes it it's not an easy step to make.
Yeah, it's beyond inherently, and I'd use the other I word, instinctively. In fact, for, once again, no names, but 2020 did some work for the Vice Chief trying to get a wrapper around everybody's innovation.
Yeah.
That's a big catch-all.
Yeah.
So all the programs being run, and we mapped it, and it was being done very inefficiently. Probably only people smiling with people like Palantir, because they'd sold the same product 4 times, four different frontline capability areas. And some bits weren't being done, so it was useful to say you've got overlap, you've got gaps. This is how it should be done. And that was Joint Force Development, which is a part of UK Strategic Command there. And even though really it was a head office organisation, but that's part of our administrative. Oh my God! Within head office, so subject to oh my Godism, there was another organisation more. If we were more militarily orientated, they were more civil service orientated. And they were looking at pure innovation as a concept, who had also gone and looked from a slightly different perspective at programs that were being undertaken across defence. And I'd managed to get a call-off, his product placement, a call-off contract. We found out we had a call-off contract with Microsoft. So we'd actually built a tool that would cross-refer and come up, actually Land Command and Air Command are working on exactly the same air defence type thing. Or we even found that one command was working on exactly the same programme under 2 one-star organisations. And even though they were socially very good friends, they'd never discussed this. And that was within one site in the UK military. And the point being, right, get everything in a database and these connections will be made. And that organisation, the MON, based in the Ministry of Defence, turned around and said, oh yeah, but we know that's what you've got there. That all works very well, but we think it's useful if we have our own one here. So at one and the same time, let's just say the voice, the voice of the institution, was saying, data, big data, the bigger the better, but it has to be put together so you can AI can machine learning can happen. But when push came to shove to actually sign to do it, that knowledge is power. Well, it's our database. We really need to keep our own. That kicks back in. So I think part of everything we've spoken about today and the things that come out, and when you dive into the literature, it's easy to, as we said, you're home on the hardware first because it's something tangible, and then you just better move away to try and think about the software. But we're still thinking about products. You really need to start thinking about culture. This really needs to be a sort of institutional cultural shift, top to bottom, to start thinking in different ways. And I would say to you, if you're thinking in different ways, you've got to start with strategic imperatives, break those down to a certain sense of mission. Your point, And then you've got to work out different ways of achieving the mission that's going to require different players, and it's going to require a different view of the psychology of contracting, because the methodologies of a software-driven business are different. The timelines are different to the methodologies of a hardware-driven business, where a lot of their value is in the physical infrastructure that they've built up. You know, if you want to build a ship, you've got to have a dockyard, haven't you?
Yeah.
That starts to shift the equation of how you think about who can build you a ship, but who can build me a kill web? So that I suppose that, and it's, you know, we're not going to win any Pulitzer prizes, you know, for this one. But sadly, you know, it's the hardest thing to alter is culture. It's the hardest thing to define.
Which I guess defence reform was trying to address as the first stage, wasn't it?
Well, yeah, and full disclosure, you know, I'm part of the team that was worked on that when John Healey was in opposition.
Yeah,
I'm not saying he's really not trying to say anything more than that.
Yeah.
But I mean, that means I do believe in it, and the reason I believe in it is because it at heart tries to at least get a sense of mission as opposed to task.
Yeah.
So in military strategic headquarters, the mission is set, as I just said before, actually, without realising we're going to take it this way, but, you know, what are the fundamental strategic objectives, and split that into a set of missions.
Yeah.
Now the job of the NAD group, there was a lot of fighting after the election in the early days of that, or should digital as a go into the NAD group? And we said, well, yeah, absolutely, because you're going to end up with it's ridiculous to say, well, the NAD can buy the hardware, but over here the software, that's just completely negated the 40 minutes we've been talking this morning. So if the NAD group is going to move into something that's software driven, and you then buy the simplest hardware you can to allow the software to be effective.
Yep.
At the end of that, you then hand that stuff, which has been, and think of the military strategic headquarters that people are going to fight and win the next war. You hand that stuff to the 3 services or 4 frontline commands to say, right, guys, get the most out of it. And I think that plays to the strengths of our servicemen and away from the weaknesses of our military institutions. So if I could justify that, I mean, we've all come across, haven't we, some most gifted technicians that work, bright young corporals, 28, I've seen stripping in a day and a half a piece of military equipment we might have found on a battlefield somewhere, and this technical intelligence, and with the Cyrillic script, no manual at all, and they'll tell you how the whole thing works, and come up with a countermeasure in a matter of minutes, and then people will write code. Our service people are really good at being entrepreneurial when you give them stuff and say, get the most out of it. I think I'm not going to get too much pushback if I say, but our military institutions based around the services haven't been that good at running big programs and bringing them in on time and under budget. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Because it's not what they were set up to do. But in peacetime, they were incentivized to become procurement agencies that buy the stuff and fight amongst themselves to make sure they get the frigates or all of that. Yeah. So you want to reset that, and if you reset that and do it around what you're suggesting this morning, that sense of mission. And I think we've already mentioned it, but to bang the nail out of sight, and this is why the Navy is not setting itself up around, even though I admit the First Sea Lord is talking about the hybrid fleet, he's based that around those Atlantic reference missions, Atlantic Bastion, Atlantic Strike, so people can get behind a sense of mission that says the fleet will be the thing that we need to deliver the mission, rather than try and define in an abstract and isolated sense what the future fleet looks like. Yeah. The reality, of course, is you're going to have a blend of the two. The Ukrainians only need now what they've got. But here's a point. As we discussed, that's been built by people without conventional military backgrounds. What's the most lethal military power in Europe at the moment? Would you look at the number of people Ukraine has got? Look at the size of its industry. Look at this, that, and the other. Can you just give any other of our European powers a chance of go and invade Ukraine and see who wants to take on, who wants to take on the job, or just imagine the Ukraine war were to be lost, and some very, very aggrieved, and they would have a right to be Ukrainians who find themselves Russian anyway.
Yeah.
It's just a thought experiment. I'm not saying it's like to happen. Please don't cut and clip my words in this podcast when it comes out. I'm only doing it for the thought experiment of, imagine you had Russia and Ukraine turned and looking west. I don't think we'd be very happy with that, would we?
No, we wouldn't. No.
But you would have to take out of it, it is people like Mikhail Fedorov, who was 28 in 2019 when he was appointed to digitise the country. Kamishin, Minister for Strategic Industries, kept the railways going.
Yeah.
Instantly good Wi-Fi on Ukrainian railways. I found out the other day because it has Starlink. Why? Can I not get decent Wi-Fi on a train going down to Portsmouth from London? But let's not go. Let's not go there. Budanov, with his technically orientated but essentially intelligence meets special forces background, and look at what they've constructed.
Yeah.
But it requires us to think very very differently about how we would structure all that themselves. But my point is, it can be done. That's a country going into this war. 2022.
Yeah.
And I know we've had a few things recently with what happened in the Gulf that have made people suddenly become aware of how fleet availability and things like that. But go back to 2022. I think there was an amazing complacency, wasn't there? We're the UK and it's little Ukraine, and post-Soviet society, there's only 44 million of them then, and the defence budget's only £7 billion, and we're a nuclear power with aircraft carriers. Yeah. My point is not they're absolutely perfect and we're not, but I think that relative, what's the shift been in the last 4 years, and our relative assessment of national military power, and I'm deliberately including in that defence industrial base, ability to adapt, ability to change, the lessons learned process, how much they know about modern era warfare.
But to your point, that is cultural. That is an acceptance that things change day by day, minute by minute, and not remaining static, because that's bleeding down into everything that they're doing.
Yeah, it is completely that. Yeah. And a willingness to try new things.
Yeah.
I deliberately included the mobile phone on a stick. I know it's a bit more sophisticated than that, because we wouldn't think that way. We think if you needed air defence of the UK, we'd be off trying to make a case to buy umpteen Boeing wedge tails to fly AWACS, and all this sort of thing. It's an ability to, what's the cheapest way I can achieve the mission? Which, as I say, they now, once again, it sounds grim to say it, but they're dealing with some pretty grim stuff. And cost per dead Russian is how you denude the Russian army and weaken it to the point that it cannot achieve the military objective set at a cost that's not going to either bankrupt the country / destroy the coalition, the coalition behind it. Mm-hmm. This is the sort of realistic thinking that we need to absorb.
Any more questions, Faz?
No, not from me.
I think we've overrun, haven't we?
Should I put a wrap on this? Should I try and summarise everything? For a conclusion.
I'm betting on you.
Okay. Thank you.
We believe in you.
Bets are in. Right. So we are seeing a shift in the UK. Maybe we're trying to get on a war footing ourselves as well. It could be our 2019, perhaps with 2020, 2021 moment at the moment. We're seeing the institution that is Ministry of Defence adapt, defence reform, try and look forward. Industry needs to match that as well. It's difficult when the players in industry have been doing so for 10, 20 years and it's always been jammed tomorrow. That never turns up quite often whilst going through expensive, protracted acquisitions. But there needs to be a leap of faith from both sides, potentially. There needs to be capitalising on the innovation that has happened in the past. There needs to be a drag across and realisation of tech debt, and whether that can be just thrown out straight away or needs to be maintained whilst the innovation comes in. But technology and cultural change are the way forward to get us into that position to be fighting fit for the future. My words, trying to summarise everything.
So I was betting on you. I think I've won my bet. Yeah, there you go.
Is that a fair representation?
That's a very fair representation, Nick.
Awesome. Thank you, Faz. And thank you very much.
No, thank you, Nick. Thank you, Faz.
Thank you.